All right, good evening, everybody. Calling this meeting to order Tuesday, September 17th. I will have our city clerk start with our roll call.
Mayor Kaylee Clark.
Here.
Deputy Mayor Karen Howe.
Here.
Councilmember Amy Lamb.
Here.
Councilmember Pamela Stewart. I might have to promote her on the computer. Councilmember Kent Treen.
Present.
Councilmember Sid Gupta.
Here.
Councilmember Roisin O'Farrell.
Here.
Thank you. And Pam is here. I'm going to move her over here.
All right. Thank you. Councilmember Lamb, will you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? All right, thank you. Councilmember Gupta, can you please do the land acknowledgement?
We acknowledge that we are on the land of indigenous. We acknowledge that we are on the indigenous land of Coast Salish peoples who have reserved treaty rights to this land, specifically the Snoqualmie Indian tribe. We thank these caretakers of this land who have lived and continue to live here since time immemorial.
Great, thank you. First up, I will entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second?
All right, moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Great, thank you. All right, so first up we have public comment. We will start in the room and then we'll move online. And we are limited to 30 minutes of public comment. So if there are repeats for EFER, I will have to limit the amount of comments. So Debbie Treen.
Good evening. Debbie Treen. I've been in Sammamish since 2010, 14 years. I wanted to speak tonight. I thought it was a public hearing, so I will back off of that, but I wanted to speak a little bit to the critical areas ordinance that is in front of you this evening. I had spent the afternoon reading through it. That's quite the exercise, by the way. Good on all of you for studying that thing. There are just a couple of things. I want to start with what I like about it is the improvements in the setback requirements for our fish-bearing streams, because as you know, our kokanee salmon are very much threatened. And the more we can do to protect our existing waterways, the better for wildlife. I'm a big supporter of wildlife. I was also excited to see the wildlife corridors map included, and I really appreciate that, as well as the definition of wildlife seems to maybe need a little bit more work. And I'll just point out that there wasn't a single mammal on there. And I understand the logic for what was defined, but we also enjoy our bobcats and deer and raccoons, and there's just a lot of species that come through here. So I was a little disappointed to see they weren't even acknowledged. So you might look at that. The one area that is of grave concern to me is the amount of leeway that is given to the staff in interpreting the need for a variance or mitigation, or how they're going to, if someone can't meet the requirements, how they're going to handle that. And over in the document, you'll see the phrase, where feasible. Well, that's just an excuse for not doing it. And also in many places, it assigns responsibility to the director to determine exactly what mitigation will be accepted. In the past, I've seen in other jurisdictions, and even here in other legislation or other regulations, a requirement, well, first of all, a requirement for a public notice and a public hearing if a variance or a deviation is going to be granted. And I think it would be really useful to incorporate that. There might be some, in one area it says that they'll give you, the public can appeal something or can ask for a hearing, but we generally don't even hear about these things going on. There's no way to rely on the public to be able to know something happened and then request a hearing. It really needs to come from the city saying, I think it's appropriate to grant this mitigation, and then invite the public to come in and comment, whether that's with the hearing examiner or some other body at the city. So hope we can find a way to kind of reduce the amount of wishy-washiness in there. Thank you.
Thank you. Steve?
Good evening. My name is Steve Christensen, Sammamish resident for 37 years. I note that you have an item on your agenda tonight to discuss the 4 initiatives that will appear on our November ballot. I'd like to recommend that you adopt a no vote on all 4 initiatives. I would also like to speak to 2 in particular, Initiative 2066 and 2177. Initiative 2177 would repeal Washington's Climate Commitment Act, cap and investment program to help reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the biggest producers in the state. It sets declining limits on emissions by the producers, requiring them to buy allowances for their greenhouse gases they produce. The act also provides an incentive for pollution reduction, thus contributing to our decarbonization of our air. The funds generated are available for projects in the state that reduce emissions, such as electrification of state ferries, various clean energy projects, electrical grid modernization, improving salmon habitat, and fire prevention, to name a few. And these guys are probably like that. Initiative 2066 is particularly problematic. It would curtail the city's ability to encourage residents to decarbonize through transition away from natural gas to electric appliances. Natural gas will be our most challenging greenhouse gas to reduce. A glance at Figure 4 in the Climate Action Plan shows a modest reduction in natural gas use from the baseline year of 2019 to 2030. But beyond 2030, it shows no progress toward reduction. This initiative would make the already challenging task of reducing our natural gas use nearly impossible. I hope Sammamish proclaims no votes on all 4 initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you. Jenny?
Hi there. My name is Jenny Clausen, and my children, Connor and Clara, attend Eastside Catholic. It was my son, Connor, that was involved in that really scary accident on September 4th. He was turning out of the school onto 28th, taking a left, when a car ran the red light and hit him with such force that it turned his Toyota Tacoma onto its side. Thankfully, he and the other driver were okay, but I know in addition to affecting my family, it affects probably everyone in the city with the shutdown and impact on traffic in that area. Since then, many people in our community have discussed different ways to try to make that intersection safer. As I was dropping off my son and as I was leaving the school, I witnessed a car run the red light. And the next week, a group of moms, we got together at the Met Market and sat on the patio and witnessed so many cars speeding on 228th. I probably don't need to tell you guys, that's kind of almost treated like a speedway sometimes. I've spoken to Gil, who is our president, and he says he has been in touch with the board before about seeing what kind of solutions we can come up with to try to make the intersection safer. So I'm here to ask if the city can please put a red light camera onto that intersection. We need it desperately. Gil said that on average, we have 1 accident a year in that intersection, and we strongly believe that having a red light camera would greatly reduce of that happening again. Thank you.
Thank you. Moya?
Hi, I'm Moya Skillman, and I am another parent at Eastside Catholic. I'm also on the board, and I'm also very short, so I'll go like this. But I'm also a real estate agent, and I sell quite a few homes in the Sammamish area. And I know one of the things that people love about this community and that you guys are proud of is how safe this community is for all types of people, you know, whether it's kids or residents that have been here a long time. That intersection is extremely dangerous. We also have a lot of people, not just Eastside Catholic students, but residents that will walk along 228th because it's such a beautiful road, that will cross over to go to the shopping area at Met Market. So you do have a lot of pedestrian traffic at that intersection as well. And so we know that if we could get a red light camera there, it really would help deter, you know, the community would start to be aware, they'd start to receive these tickets, their insurance, you know, we know the impact that that can have, and without having to do major infrastructure changes or really tax the budget, something like that is kind of an easier fix. I know it still requires budget, but it really would save lives. We're really lucky that Connor is still with us. Quite frankly, it was a very scary accident. So thank you, and I'll give the time back.
Thank you. Mary?
Hello, Mary Wichter, Sammamish for 24 years. My husband also walks for exercise and health, and I would think he would corroborate that there's way too much going on at that intersection. Anyway, my topic is I wanted to start with that there's an anniversary this year. It's a 10-year anniversary. It's not a happy one. Oso, Washington, 4 miles east at 10:37 in the morning. Took only about 3 seconds. 10 million cubic yards of earth came down and buried 40 homes and killed 43 people. It's reported as the worst landslide disaster and the most deadly in the history of the United States. And yes, Oso is in Washington. So back in 2017, when I was advocating for critical areas, even back then, King County actually changed their mapping, and I emailed this to you. The purple is landslide. The darker stuff is the steep slopes, because they're not everywhere in the landslide. And then if you look, there's a little teal line around it. That's where there's a potential 50-foot buffer setback needed. So you're tasked this year with doing the 2020 comp plan, or excuse me, 2024 comp plan, where you need to have goals and policies. You need to do the critical areas ordinance update, and you have to have the development code that matches that, and it all has to be adopted and approved for effective at the end of the year, so it can be used for next year, or you'll be non-compliant. So my request is, I've done a lot of study. Critical areas first came in 2003, 2005. There was a lot of work done in 2008. I think there were over 50 meetings in 2013, but it was primarily only done for erosion hazard areas. And landslides are actually more risky because once you get any amount of water into the soils, it can slip. And like a landslide that's, 3 dump truck loads of dirt can come down and actually cover somebody or cover wildlife or cover a kid. So I did email quite a few things, so I'm not going to go over those, and that anybody can look at those or staff can follow them. But the things that I've learned is if you aren't identifying steep slopes, anybody that cares about trees, if a steep slope is identified or a landslide hazard, according to the Emergencies Tree Ordinance from 2014, 100% of the trees can be saved, and if they can't be saved for that site, then they can be replanted somewhere if we can identify where that would be. But when you find a slope, if you have, because I've heard Director Pyle say, yeah, you can build on a steep slope, or you can build on a steep slope, but if you put water into or on that slope, it totally changes the equation. So even if you spend a lot of money hiring a geotech, it just doesn't work the same, and you will have problems, which is why it's really important for critical areas. You need to identify things, and you need to protect them. You need to make sure the code works with stormwater code, and that you're not adding to places where maybe there was construction done in the past that wouldn't meet code today. So I'm a little bit worried about all those things. So anyway, I've given you enough data to go from. I did read the red line version when it went to the Planning Commission. I read the regular version this time and tried to do detailed as I can. And probably to work out things and make sure we get the best code changes from Avalon Group, I should probably meet with staff sometime soon. Thanks.
Thank you. Karen?
Hi, Karen Herring, Sammamish, 25-ish years. I'm here to speak for the critical areas, and ditto Debbie and Mary. And critical areas are pretty much all we have left to develop on. Critical areas, sensitive areas, they're marked everywhere, but people don't know where they are. My own home is in a critical area. We did not build our house. I found it 25 years ago, was shocked and impressed, and we bought it. It has everything a human needs to survive on the planet right now, but we want to keep it that way. Food, water, wood, everything. So all around me, development is happening, and we have setbacks that are being ignored, buffers that are being ignored, and they're in the code and they're not to be ignored, but this is happening and needs to stop. So in our new critical areas where you're allowing the director to, if you allow the director to mitigate and change what's supposed to happen and not match that code, which is there for a reason, you're not protecting the critical areas that the critical area protection is supposed to do. And I ask you to consider that when you're just thinking about it, talking about it, and deciding what to do. Because once you wreck a place, it's wrecked for good. And it costs a lot of money to restore places where you're now taking on water, your own slopes are coming down at you, and so on. And this has happened, and it will happen again if we don't do better. I ask you to do better, and thank you.
Thank you. Ray?
Good evening, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, City Council members. My name is Ray Austin. I'm Vice President of IFF Local 1762, which is the Eastside Firefighters. We represent 252 members that make up Eastside Fire. I'm here with some of my brothers and sisters out of concern and protest for the recent developments in the budget meetings that have been happening. The budget's being developed for 25-26 for Eastside Fire, and there are some significant concerns. I know you all received the letter that the local sent you about this issue. I thought I would read the letter into the record so that everybody at home can understand what the position of the union is and stress our concerns. Local 1762 is deeply concerned about the recent directive from Eastside Fire and Rescue Board that forced Chief Lane to potentially cut critical medical, fire suppression, and support staff services. This decision undermines the safety and effectiveness of our community response, and it directly jeopardizes the safety of our firefighters, who are already stretched thin. We operate under a tight budget that is significantly lower than other comparable agencies. We are currently making do with outdated tools, equipment, and apparatus, and this cannot continue. Further cuts will compound these challenges and compromise both public safety and the well-being of those who risk their lives daily. This course of action is reckless, short-sighted, and ethically indefensible. As a union, we are not only committed to our members, but just as important, we are committed to ensuring the safety and welfare of the communities that we serve. This shared responsibility defines who we are and the values that we uphold. The recent directive poses a direct threat not only to our ability to protect the public, but also to the safety and health of our union members. Let it be clear. This directive will be met with the full strength of our membership, supported by the union's collective resources and financial backing. We will not hesitate to pursue all available legal avenues to challenge these actions, ensuring that the rights and the safety of our members, as well as the community we serve, are protected. Thank you.
Thank you. Caitlin?
My name is Caitlin Schreiber, and thanks for letting me speak today. I'm a resident of Sammamish and have been for almost 20 years. I'm also the mother of 4 sons, and 3 of whom are now drivers. They all learned how to drive at the house we currently live at, which is on Southeast 21st Place. It's a small street near the intersection of 228 Southeast and Southeast 20th. Driving on 228th is a daily concern for me, my family, and our neighbors as we navigate the often harrowing and dangerous process of making a U-turn to get to our home or to head north on 228th to Eastside Catholic, where my younger two sons go to school. Many mornings, I will often drive my sons to school if they are running late or if traffic seems particularly bad. Almost every morning, I am in fear of somebody hitting me or him at Southeast 24th at the corner of Discovery Elementary as I am trying to make a U-turn. And almost every time, it's the same Issaquah School District bus driver. They're not watching me as I am trying to make the U-turn. Frankly, I feel it is just a matter of time that ourselves or one of our neighbors is either hit while we are making a U-turn or rear-ended as we slow down to turn onto our street. I'm grateful for the changes the city has made over the years in regard to traffic and signage, in particular the signage at Southeast 20th and 228th, with the sign that says "No turn on red," and even the little addition of the little orange squares. I see this sign ignored almost every day, but because of the "No turn on red" sign, I feel very comfortable honking and waving at the cars and pointing at the sign, hopefully helping them realize why the sign is there in the first place. And I'm in favor of anything implemented to help drivers slow down along this road and be more cautious. After hearing about the car accident that happened to Connor Clausen, seeing the pictures and hearing from his mom about how bad the accident could have been, it is time to implement more strategies to keep our kids safe at the intersection, not only at Eastside Catholic, but at the intersections of all three high schools on 228th. It more than makes sense to install red light cameras at these intersections. If these are installed at these intersections, it will improve the safety of the entire road by giving drivers another reminder to slow down and pay attention. And from my daily lived experience, the more traffic and safety reminders along this street, the better. Please take the steps necessary to ensure that our drivers, including the hundreds and hundreds of inexperienced drivers from our three high schools that travel on this road every day, are kept as safe as possible. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Did anyone not get a chance to sign up that would like to speak? Okay, do we have anyone online?
Per the reasonable accommodation, those who had pre-registered by 5 o'clock today, please raise your hand if you wish to speak. I do not see any commenters. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. All right, so we have up for consideration the consent calendar. Deputy Mayor Howe.
I move that we approve the consent calendar, but I would like to pull number 7. So amend that.
Okay, so motion is to approve consent with number 7, the snow and ice management plan, removed. Do we have a second for that or anything else?
Second.
Okay. Moved and seconded. Did anyone else have anything else they would like to poll or any other questions? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Opposed? All right, I will move that one. Okay, thank you. Next up, we have our discussion on the state legislative initiatives with Mike Sugg. And as he's getting ready, Council, I think we will do, obviously, we're not voting yes or no on these tonight, like for or against, but we are just voting to see what's coming back on the 1st of October. So we'll probably do a raise of hands after Mike cues us up.
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening, Council. Mike Sugg, Supervising Management Analyst in the City Manager's Office. When voters receive their ballots in November, they will be asked to decide whether to support or oppose 4 initiatives. Those are initiatives 2066, which would ensure
Sorry, Mike, can you pause for a minute? If you can hear me. There's the firefighters. Hey, Mike, can you hear me okay?
Hello, Mike. We're still trying to get the tech up here. Thank you.
Awesome. but Pam and Mike can both hear, hopefully. Awesome. Cool.
Mike, can you do an audio check?
Yeah. Audio check. Can you
We
hear me?
cannot hear you.
I heard him a little bit. It was super quiet.
Okay, we're going to turn the volume up here. Okay, another test, Mike?
Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Perfect.
All right, welcome back, everybody. I think we're good to go. Sorry, Mike. I'm sure you did a really great job. Please, round two.
Absolutely, yes. Thank you, Mayor, and good evening, Council. Once again, Mike Sugg, Supervising Management Analyst in the City Manager's Office. When voters receive their ballots in November, they will be asked to decide whether to support or oppose 4 initiatives. Those are Initiatives 2066, which would ensure that utilities continue providing natural gas services. It also limits cities' abilities to disincentivize natural gas. Initiative 2109, which would repeal the 7% capital gains tax on long-term assets over $250,000, resulting in less funding for education and school construction. Initiative 2117, which would repeal the Climate Commitment Act program that funds a variety of climate-related projects in areas such as clean transportation. And finally, Initiative 2124 would make the state's long-term care benefit program voluntary instead of mandatory, potentially impacting the program's viability. Council has the option, but certainly not the obligation, to take a position on one or more of these initiatives. Staff surveyed Council on their preferences and did not see any consensus among the responses, apart from an interest in Initiative 2117 concerning the Climate Commitment Act. So tonight, the City Manager is seeking direction on which of the 4 initiatives Council would like to come back for action on your October 1st agenda. Prior to Council taking action at that meeting on the 1st, there will be a public hearing so that the community has an opportunity to express their support or opposing views before you all take action. So we'll start with the Council direction on the initiatives. After that, I have one more related topic. If I could request a brief moment to speak after the Council's done deliberating on this piece. And with that said, I will go ahead and turn it back over to you, Mayor Clark.
Great, thank you, Mike. So we were going to do raise of hands, but if anyone would like to speak before we do show of hands for what's coming back. If you want to discuss before we raise hands to Deputy Mayor Howe.
Okay, I think I'm going to try to ask a clarifying question. The way that I look at these, there are 2 in specific that really relate specifically back to the city where it's very much in our lane. And there are 2 that really don't feel like they're quite as much as in our lane as we don't have any control over them. In specific, it would be the 2109 and 2124. I don't feel like they have direct impact on the city or specific finances. So is that a way to look at it, or do you perceive it the same way? Whereas the natural gas initiative and the climate and 2117, both a direct impact on the city, and we could actually lose funding as a result.
Sorry, Deputy Mayor, is that directed to me?
Well, I think it's a conversation starter for the council.
Sure. Thank you.
Councilmember Stewart.
Yeah, I would say that the 2109 would have vast impacts on budgeting, including funding to municipalities, because if that funding source is removed, the programs that it funds will still need to be funded. That is for education, which early childhood education services. So those programs would not go away. The state would merely have to fund them from other sources, which most certainly would impact how much money would be available to municipalities. And in speaking with some of our legislators, they said absolutely it would very much upend the budgeting, the budget as it is today, and would require them to cut funding in a lot of areas. So I do think, while it may not be as obvious of a straight line, it would absolutely impact funding. Not to mention the fact that I think education is incredibly important to our community, and ensuring that we have appropriate funding for early childhood education, I think it is important to the community.
Councilmember Lamb?
I just wanted to remind council that one of our legislative priorities was to ask our legislators to support more progressive taxes. This is a progressive tax. It affects 3,000 people that have paid the capital gains tax, and the vast majority of the residents in Washington will not be paying this tax. And like I said, it is part of our legislative priorities. Thanks.
All right, council, does anyone have any other discussion or comments before we vote on what to bring? All right, I'm just going to go down the line. We're going to do show of hands. I don't know if you can see Mike, but hopefully. So raise your hand if you would like to bring 2066 back on October 1st. So it looks like you have 5. Okay. Raise your hand if you want to bring back 2109. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, you got that, Mike?
Yes.
2117. 6. Okay, and 2124. 1. So it looks like we're bringing back 2066, 2109, and 2117. If that sounds good. All right. And go ahead, Mike, with your second announcement.
Yes, and I apologize. I intended to include this in the agenda, Bill, but related to the prior discussion, staff have been working with our city lobbyists, Luke and Nick, to discuss strategy for the upcoming legislative session. And as we all know, part of this strategy will involve creating our legislative agenda for next year. So in reviewing the current agenda with our lobbyists, we determined that most of what's included is still fairly relevant. And so our recommendation would be that the city continue with largely the same group of priorities going into 2025. Typically on the backside of our agenda is where we list things that we support, but we're not necessarily taking the lead on. And I think this is where we have more flexibility to change things for next year. So in years past, council has assigned a legislative committee composed of up to 3 council members to work with staff and our lobbyists to develop that recommended agenda. So tonight we're looking for direction on which members would like to serve on the committee, which I anticipate will meet roughly the first week of October and should only need about 2 meetings to develop the recommendation for council. One caveat is that depending on the outcome of the initiatives in November, we may need to reconvene the legislative committee to discuss any impacts on our priorities after that occurs. So I will stop here and turn it back to the mayor for any discussion on legislative committee appointments.
Great, thank you, Mike. I'm up for who wants to volunteer, if anyone. We have Deputy Mayor Howe, Councilmember Lamb, Councilmember Stewart. Were these the same 3 as last year? Would anyone else like to do it? As in, Pam was not. Okay.
I can always drop if someone else wants on.
Can't? You sure? Okay. All right. Looks like Councilmember Stewart, Deputy Mayor Howe, and Councilmember Lamb.
Fantastic. Thank you, Council.
Yep. Okay. So next up we have the start of our proclamations for National Pollution Week. Oh, sorry. Councilmember Stewart? Oh, you're leaving, aren't you? Sorry.
Mayor, yes, I was going to say I would like to request permission to have an excused absence for the rest of the meeting.
Definitely excused. Do we need to vote
Thank
on
you so
that?
much.
I don't think we do. No. All right. Good night.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. National Pollution Week.
National Pollution Prevention Week. Whereas National Pollution Prevention Week, recognized since 1990 by the United States Environmental Protection Agency, highlights the importance of reducing pollution at its source before recycling, treatment, or disposal. And the theme for this year, Together We Are One Planet, emphasizes our collective responsibility to prevent pollution and protect our environment through concerted actions. And the City of Sammamish City Council is committed to protecting the natural environment through integrated natural resource management, supporting efforts that enhance sustainability and improve environmental quality. And King County is a leader in implementing programs that reduce and prevent pollution generated by businesses, residents, and municipal operations by partnering with the community to protect our environment. And pollution prevention protects human health and the environment, benefiting both communities and businesses by reducing costs associated with pollution cleanup. And by preventing pollution, we can improve the health of frontline communities, reduce climate impacts, and contribute to the sustainability of our planet. Now, therefore, Mayor Kaylee Clark, on behalf of the Sammamish City Council, does hereby proclaim the week of September 16th through 20th, 2024, as National Pollution Prevention Week.
Great, thank you so much. Next up, we have National Hispanic Heritage Month. I'll be reading that one. Whereas Hispanic Americans have profoundly shaped the history, culture, and prosperity of the United States through their leadership, creativity, and resilience in all sectors of society. And the theme, Pioneers of Change, Shaping the Future Together, recognizes the groundbreaking contributions of Hispanic leaders who have advanced progress in areas such as education, technology, business, politics, and civil rights. And Hispanic trailblazers have overcome adversity and broken barriers, paving the way for future generations to lead and innovate while contributing to the shared vision of a more just and equitable society. And the Hispanic community's rich cultural heritage and spirit of collaboration continue to inspire change, building stronger, more vibrant communities in Sammamish and across the nation. And Hispanic Heritage Month offers an opportunity to honor the past and present contributions of Hispanic pioneers who have shaped our collective future by championing diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the City of Sammamish proudly joins the nation in celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month and recognizing the ongoing contributions of Hispanic pioneers as we work together to build a brighter future for all. Be it further resolved that I, Kaylee Clark, Mayor, on the behalf of Sammamish City Council, do hereby proclaim September 15th through October 15th as Hispanic Heritage Month and encourage all residents to join in celebrating the Hispanic culture and its enduring legacy of shaping the future. All right, and now we have the AVM, or Brain Arteriovenous Malformation Awareness Month, and we have Anesh as a special guest.
So, Brain AVM Awareness Month, October 2024. Whereas arteriovenous malformation is potentially a life-threatening condition in which abnormal blood vessels connect arteries and veins in the brain, disrupting normal flow, and whereas AVMs affect approximately 300,000 Americans, often without a symptom, until a rupture occurs, leading to serious medical emergencies such as seizures, strokes, or brain hemorrhages. And whereas without treatment, people with an AVM face a 1 to 3% risk of rupture annually, which can result in severe disabilities or death, and whereas early diagnosis and treatment, including surgery, radiation therapy, and embolization, can reduce the risk of complications, improve survival rates, and enhance the quality of life for those afflicted. And whereas greater public awareness, education, and research are essential in understanding AVM, supporting those affected, and encouraging early detection to prevent further health risks. And whereas advocacy support networks, including AVM awareness, organizations, and patient support groups, provide vital resources to individuals and families, helping them navigate medical treatments and emotional challenges. And whereas ongoing fundraising efforts and donations to AVM research can accelerate the discovery of new treatments, improve early diagnosis, and enhance the quality of care for those living with AVM. Now, therefore, be it resolved that Mayor Kaylee Clark, on behalf of the Sammamish City Council, does hereby proclaim October 2024 as Brain AVM Awareness Month in the City of Sammamish. And thank you for bringing this forward.
Yeah, thank you so much. Okay, and then hopefully Scott will get that picture posted. Yeah. Okay, so now we have unfinished business for the next few months, I think, with Vicki, the 2025-2026 operational budget.
Good evening, Vicki Carlson, Finance Director for the record. I just need to remember how to share my screen here. All right, I may need help. Where do I share my screen here? Ah, there it is. Okay. Perfect. All right. So tonight, let me get this out of my way so I can actually read my notes. So tonight, I'm going to be covering a lot of information. It is going to be high level, but please remember this is not the only time that you're going to have this information in front of you. You're going to have plenty of time over the next few months to have all of your questions answered. Tonight is a continuation of the budget presentation that we started last week. Last week, we reviewed the CIP, and tonight we're going to be reviewing the operations budget, which includes the funds we did not talk about last week, as well as closing the loop on equipment rental and IT, both of which are part of our citywide CIP. So the order that I'm going to be talking about the budget presentation is going to be a little bit different than how it is in the memo. From a presentation perspective, it flows a little better if we focus on the other funds first. So we'll be talking about surface water first, equipment rental, IT risk, and then spending the rest of the evening on the general fund. So with that, I'm going to start with the surface water fund. And just a reminder, this visual you've seen before, the funds with the red box around it, those are the ones we're going to be talking about tonight. And again, we're going to stay high level tonight. You will get the full budget document, which includes the line item budget on October 1st. And in October, you're also going to have the department presentations. And as a reminder, we did change how the budget was drafted to this time. I put the philosophy up here because it's always good to remind that. But I do want to point out the last bullet point. When we saw the trajectory of the general fund, we did go back to departments for additional reductions. Those reductions resulted in about $2.2 million for the biennium. They do result in some service level reductions. You're going to be hearing the specific reductions in October when the departments do their presentations. So if you're going to follow along on the memo, we're going to jump into surface water operations, and that is starting on page 11 of your memo. So the surface water operating fund, which operates like a separate business. It handles the surface water functions of the city. The proposed budget that you see tonight is based on the same enhanced level of service, same as the CIP reviewed last week. The total expense budget for the upcoming biennium is about $26 million, and it does include $9.7 million in transfers to the Surface Water Capital Fund for the CIP projects, and about $1.1 million in transfers to equipment rental and replacement, technology, risk, and facilities. And I do want to comment quickly on the operating transfers into these other functions like fleet, technology, and risk. As you know, any business has overhead, right? In addition to technology and the insurance costs, you have administrative functions like human resources and accounting requirements. You have to pay staff, you have to pay bills. Surface Water currently reimburses the general government side of the house for equipment, tech, and risk insurance, but doesn't currently reimburse for administrative cost, and it really should. So we're going to be building out a full cost model that will capture these additional costs. More to come on this next year. So this is a summary of the full budget. It does include the capital transfers. I did learn my lesson from last week. So the way this is set out is the biennial view for 2023. The far left column is the projected, which is 2023 and 2024. You have the next column over, which is the budget, and then you see the annual view as well as the total for the upcoming biennium. The top half is revenues. In order to fit all of the stuff on one chart, I did do some pretty good summarizing here. So on the top chart, you see the surface water fees and other fees, which is mainly interest and some developer contributions. This middle section is the expenditures, again, summarized by major category. And the bottom section is the fund balance. You'll see we do have adequate fund balance at the end of 2026 to fully fund the CIP projects and also into the next biennium. If you're interested in seeing a further breakdown on the revenues and the expenses for this fund, you can find a chart on page 11 of the memo. And again, you'll be getting the line item detail, which will give even more detail on October 1st. So with that, are there any questions on the surface water operation fund?
I see nothing.
Okay. So moving into the equipment rental operations budget, if you're following along on the memo, the details start on page 7. So this fund covers the cost of maintaining and replacing vehicles and equipment for all departments. The total budget is about $1.6 million, and that does include $600,000 for purchases that were included in the CIP that we saw last week. Additional funding comes from transfers from either the general fund or the surface water fund. Total transfers is about $1.7 million, with most of it coming from the general fund. 2 things to note on this fund. Starting next year, all fuel budgets are going to be accounted for in this fund. Right now, fuel is scattered all across city departments in both the general fund and the surface water funds. We're hoping that centralizing the fuel cost in this fund will make it easier to track the usage. And also, I believe I mentioned this last week, we do have it in our work plan for next year to do a complete review of the fleet program, which may or may not change ending fund balance requirements. So this is the budget for the equipment replacement fund. It includes not only the operational budget, but the capital piece. The other revenue on this slide includes interest as well as some proceeds from sale of surplus vehicles and equipment. This last line in the capital line, hopefully these numbers look familiar to you for the next biennium. That is the capital that we reviewed last week. You can refer back to last week's memo if you want to see a list of the upcoming purchases. And also there's a chart on this fund on page 8 if you'd like to see further breakdown of both the revenues and the expenditures. Again, ending fund balance is about $2.9 million at the end of 2026. This may or may not be the appropriate fund balance, but we really need to do the review on the fleet fund before we make any adjustments to the ending fund balance. Any questions on this fund?
I don't see any.
Okay. So on to the technology or IT fund. I do use those 2 terms interchangeably, even though it is one fund. So this fund counts for all of the tech needs and data security for all departments. We also have several staff budgeted in this fund. Total budget is about $9 million, including $1.8 million for projects that are included in the CIP. Funding comes primarily from transfers from the general fund and the surface water fund. This fund does have one dedicated revenue source, and that's the technology fee. As a reminder about the tech fee, it is the highest in the area, so increasing it for additional revenue really isn't practical. Total transfers are about $7.1 million, with most coming from the general fund. And as a reminder, we are drawing down fund balance as we plan to roll these activities into the general fund starting in 2027. So this is the budget for the next year for the technology fund. Again, capital transfers are located down here. I'm sorry, capital expenditures, $950,827. That matches to the CIP. I do want to point out that capital transfers on the revenue side is less than what we're planning on spending because we're using existing fund balance to draw this fund balance down. And again, page 9 of the memo, if you want to see greater breakdown on both the revenues and expenditures.
Council, any questions on IT, technology? Councilmember Trine?
Seems odd to be pulling money from the stormwater accounting of $883,000 on a transfer. Can you explain why, how it matches
Sure.
up?
There are staff in the surface water fund, and so they have technology needs. They have laptops. They have technology equipment. They also, some of their work falls into our accounting system, right? We pay invoices for it. There's technology. I'm sorry, I'm not doing a good job explaining this one. There are technology needs in the surface water fund, and this is partially transferring in to cover those costs. It's part of the indirect cost allocation model. It's not a full model, but it's part of those costs. And with technology, again, it's laptops, some other customized technical equipment that they use.
Thank you.
And I believe Audrey could probably answer that question much better than I just did.
Any other questions? Okay, none.
Okay, moving on to the risks. So this is the last fund we're going to briefly review before we get into the general fund. This is a small fund. It's where we account for our liability, auto, and property insurance. It's also where we pay any unemployment claims. Total budget is $2.6 million for the biennium, with about $2.4 million coming from the general fund. And the rest is coming from the surface water fund. Couple things to note on this fund. So we are reviewing our deductibles, and there may be potential savings starting in 2026. If we can increase our deductibles, we have to make that election once a year. We can make that election this November for 2026. But just note that any reductions in costs because of increases to our deductibles will be offset by the additions of property and other assets that need to be insured. All the assets required, including property, they do get added to our property list, and we do see insurance increases because we just have more things we have to insure. And this is the budget for the risk fund. It's a pretty simple budget because, again, there's not much accounted for in this fund. We are drawing down the fund balance, so we'll be down to about $50,000 at the end of the biennium. And again, we're hoping to fold this into the general fund starting with the following biennium.
Council, any questions for risk? All good.
Okay, so the general fund. This is where we're going to spend the rest of the evening. And it is everything remaining that we have not already talked about. So at the 100,000 foot level, total revenue budgeted for the biennium is $114 million. Total budgeted expenditures is $134 million. So it is a drawdown of existing fund balance of $20 million. All of the revenue sources in the general fund, we have 5 that add up to roughly 93% of the total general fund revenue. Revenues have been budgeted based on known factors. For example, we know property tax revenue can only grow at 1% plus new construction. We also know about potential changes. For example, the federal government has signaled that they plan to reduce interest rates, so we've taken that into consideration as we've built that part of the budget. We've also taken into consideration changes to our fee schedule, which you'll see later on this year. We've looked at the local economy and what the forecast is for the local area. And we also look at historical trends. All those are what we look at when we build the revenue budget for the next biennium. For projecting into the future, the out years 2027 through 2030, we take all of that into consideration, and we also look at trend analysis over time, because the further you get out, the bigger your margin of error could be. So we also look at trend analysis for that. So like I said on the last slide, about 93% of our general fund revenue comes from 5 sources, and I think it's important to really understand what those 5 sources are. So unlike most of our other surrounding cities that have more types of revenue, we have 5 that are the main ones. The largest one is property tax revenue. We're budgeting $72 million for the biennium, and that is about 63% of our total revenue for the general fund. Remember, 63% of our general fund revenue is limited to 1% growth plus new construction. Any new construction is minimal because we're mostly a residential community. Over time, our property tax revenue grows roughly less than 2% annually. Any increases above this would require voter approval, which would be a levy lid lift. Retail sales tax, that's our second largest revenue source and is 13% of our total revenue for the general fund. In the upcoming biennium, it's projected to be $15 million. And this is actually an interesting revenue source to look at over time. If you look in past years prior to the pandemic, we were seeing growth, particularly when online retail really started to take off and Amazon became a much bigger presence. Sales tax revenue actually grew during the pandemic when businesses had to revert to picking up or delivery only. More people turned to online shopping, so we continue to see an increase in sales tax revenue, which was not like a lot of other surrounding cities. However, the last couple of years, we have not seen growth in sales tax revenue. It is flatlined. Looking forward into the out year, we have shown sales tax growing at 3% a year. That may or may not be realistic unless we have increases in population or elements of the town center come on. But it's based on 3% growth, based on the trends as we've seen over time and what we know today. So these next 2 revenue sources outside of property and sales tax, these are our next 2 largest revenue sources, 6% and 5% respectively. Both have elements of volatility in them. Permit fees are tied to growth and what I would call tenant improvements or remodels. Park fees can be dependent on weather. Just a note about the cable franchise fee that we have started to see that one decline a little bit. I think this is a really good example of consumer behavior changes that does affect our revenue sources. As more people cut the cord to cable and move to streaming for entertainment, it is going to change that revenue source, and it's going to be declining. Overall, though, the budget has been based on historical data and trend analysis, and then the out years show a 3% growth for both of these going forward. And then the final revenue source I just want to quickly mention, because it also generates about 5% of our general fund revenue. This is the part of sales tax, so we buy something, it's 10.2%. Part of that tax goes to us directly because of destination-based sales tax. Part of it is levied by King County. That's the criminal justice excise tax. The county keeps part of it. The rest of it is distributed to cities, but it's distributed on a per capita basis, which is a little bit different. So we see little different trend lines with that particular revenue source. And again, we've projected it to grow at about 3% annually in the out years. All of the rest of the revenue that the general fund receives is about 8%. It includes a lot of different revenue sources, including other state shared revenues, fines and penalties, grants, interest, donations. It's a fairly long list, but it's only 8% of our total revenue. And for the next biennium, it's projected to bring in about $8.9 million over the biennium. So this is the projected revenue budget for 2026. Again, $114 million over the next 2 years. Any questions on revenues before we move into expenditures?
I don't want to go to expenditures. Councilmember Gupta.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. I know grants are hard to predict, and I think you might have even mentioned this in one of our previous presentations, but I just wanted to note that the grant projections for 25-26 are significantly lower than what we're projecting 23-24 to have ended with. So I wondered if you could speak to that.
Yes, that is correct. The city did receive ARPA funding from the federal government, and so ARPA funds were fully spent in the current biennium. We don't get them next biennium. So it was a significant grant source to the city, but it is gone. It is not in the next biennium. Next year we have, I think, 2 grants, one for emergency management, recycling grant, and something else. But you're right, it is limited grant funding into the next biennium.
Great, thank you very much.
Okay, and I did forget to pop this chart up. So this is the actual projections for revenue. You can see that by the end of 2030, we will have roughly $61 million in total revenue for the general fund. Okay, so with that, I am going to move on to expenditures. So there's a few things I want to mention on the expenditure side. So where possible, we have identified costs that would be considered one-time. To isolate those so we don't double budget for those in future years. As an example, we know we have an impact fee study that's scheduled for next year. So there's budget in that for 2025, not for 2026. We want to make sure that those one-time costs are identified. So again, we don't keep counting them year after year. Personnel costs are budgeted per contract language. Contract language calls for CPI increases to be an average of the last 4 years. And just remember, we're coming out of the highest inflation period in like 40 years. So this contract language calls for some higher CPI increases right now. Also, we're essentially a contract city, meaning that many of the services we provide to our community are handled by contractors rather than city staff. We have fully budgeted existing contractual obligations. So as an example, we have a contract for annual elevator maintenance. We know the specifics of that contract, so we've fully budgeted that contract. However, there's an on-call element. So for example, we might have baked into the contract, they might come out 10 times over a year, but if on average they've only come out once a year, we've only budgeted for that once a year. We're not budgeting for those on-call costs. Transfers to other funds are budgeted based on maintaining minimum fund balance targets, not necessarily the full funding requirement for those projects, because again, we're trying to utilize existing fund balance and right-size those fund balances in other funds. And something that's new to the budget this year that we built into it, we built in a, however you want to call it, a budget reduction or a negative budget for staff vacancies, as well as for the vacancies that persist with our police contracts. So when you see the details of the salaries and benefits in each department, you're going to see them fully budgeted. However, we've placed a negative amount. It's 5% of total salaries and benefits. and $500,000 for the police vacancies directly into the budget. Those negative budget amounts reduce the total budgeted expenditures. This is something that's built into the long-range model, so we went ahead and built it into the budget itself. And as I mentioned earlier, we're trying to tag one-time expenditures where possible. So I do consider these salary reductions to be one-time in nature. The goal is to be fully staffed, right? And then we strive to achieve that. However, the current vacancies do persist, so we've captured those savings in the budget, but we have tagged them as one-time. So salaries and benefits for the next biennium are $42.7 million, or about 32% of the budget. Again, the budget reduction we've built into the budget for vacancies is just over $2 million for city staff. A couple other comments about the personnel budget. No new FTEs are being proposed, and the intern budget has been removed. You'll hear about the impacts of removing the interns when we get to the department presentations next month. Looking into the future, we projected CPI increases to be 2%, but remember our contract language calls for the 4-year average, so the contract increases are going to be higher for a few years until it catches up to the lower CPI. Benefits have been projected using a 5% inflator, and remember benefits included medical. Those costs really show small increases year over year. So the supplies budget, this is the smallest section of our budget. It's about $2.2 million, less than 2% of the total budget. Covers quite a few things. This is all the stuff that's needed to run the city. It's not just office supplies, it's small tools and equipment. It's supplies for snow and ice removal, supplies for running programs. Supplies are subject to inflationary pressure, so there is a 3% inflator built into the projections in the out years. Police and fire, these are our two largest contracts. The two contracts together total $45.8 million for the biennium, more than our total personnel costs, interestingly enough. We have not received the final budget for police yet because they have just finished up their labor negotiations, but we have estimated a 7% increase for both years. When we get the numbers, we'll see if that was a correct estimate or not. This is where we've also included $500,000 every year as a negative budget to account for those police vacancies that continue to exist. We have received preliminary numbers for fire and the fire contract for the next biennium. It was a 23% increase for 2025 and another 8% increase for 2026. Remember I showed you the revenue budget, and 63% of our revenues is property tax, which grows at less than 2% a year. And so you can see where this is going. On a final note, we don't know what the increases are for either police or fire going forward into the out years. They are essential services. We've built an inflator of 5% into the out years. Honestly, that's probably too low, but looking back at the fiscal sustainability, that's what they built into the long-range model, so that's what we've kept going forward for this. Other services, so this is where the rest of the expenditure budget is, except for transfers. Given we're a contract city, this is a pretty large part of our budget. It's $22 million over the biennium, or about 16% of the total expenditure budget. Listed on the slide are some of the costs that are captured in this category. There were service level reductions in this area as part of the $2.2 million reduction that I mentioned earlier. We'll see the details of that next month when you get the department presentations. And then finally, this is the last expenditure category. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this because we've covered the transfers when we went through all of the other funds and the CIPs. Just remember the transfers are calculated to provide enough funding to meet minimum fund balance targets, not more than what's necessary. And then this is the proposed expenditure budget based on what we just walked through. Total expenditures are $134 million for the biennium. And the next slide shows the projections for 2027 through 2030. And I dropped in the projected revenue line at the very bottom so you can see the difference between the total projected expenditures compared to total projected revenues for the out years, 4 years matching up to the CIP timeline. Okay, so moving on to the next really fun section to talk about. So this is the fund balance section. There's a few things to point out on this slide. So the top section in blue, this is the fund balance, beginning fund balance, net change, which is total revenues less total expenditures, equals ending fund balance. Currently, we are projecting to end 2024 with an ending fund balance of $55 million. That becomes the beginning fund balance for 2025. Starting in 2025, that's where we see things flip and total expenditures start to exceed total revenues each year. The net change for 2026 is slightly less than 2025, only because our capital needs are a little bit less in 2026. But the total drawdown of fund balance for the biennium is expected to be around $20 million. And keep in mind, this is after we've already pulled out $2 million for the second round of budget reductions and over $3 million as the negative budget for position vacancies. Also included in this top chart is the reserve requirement. What I've shown here is the proposed method of calculating the required reserve, not what's currently by policy. The current reserve requirement is 25%, and this is 25%. The current policy calls for it to be calculated on expenditures, and I have recommended that we change it to be 25% of ongoing revenues. If this was still based on expenditures, the reserve requirement would be much higher. Also included, where did I leave off here? Okay, moving on to the bottom half. The bottom half in green, this shows some analysis on the net change from the line above. So this is where you can see the ongoing analysis, ongoing revenues versus ongoing expenditures. You can see projected for the biennium, we're going to be to the good by about $6.7 million. But going into the next biennium, we go upside down right out of the gate. And then also the one-time expenditures versus one-time revenue. Just trying to provide a little bit of analysis on the fund balance piece. And then here is the projections for 2027 through 2030. If nothing changes, by 2028, our available fund balance trying to maintain the reserve, we actually can't maintain the full reserve in 2028. We can only retain 10 million of it. And at the end of 2029, we are out of fund balance, including the reserves. So I know some people like numbers, other people like graphics. So these next few slides are basically showing the exact same information, just graphically. So this is showing the fund balance situation we have going on. These top bars are the reserve requirement, and you can see starting in 2028, we have to dip into reserves, and it's fully gone in 2029. This is the same chart showing the exact same information, just ignoring the fund balance reserve, and you can see clearly by 2029, it's all gone. Which is also why last week, you remember me saying, when we get to the out years in the CIP, we can't fully fund the CIP. And this is the showing that. This chart just shows total revenues versus total expenditures. You can see our revenues really don't grow very much, while our expenditures do. And this is the same thing, but just looking at ongoing revenues versus ongoing expenditures. And I have one more slide that I do want to show. The Fiscal Sustainability Task Force did a lot of work last year, unpacking the structural imbalance that we face and coming up with recommendations for long-term fiscal sustainability. One of the top options that had been suggested was a utility tax, so I thought I wanted to just model this for you so you could see what it looked like. What this shows is a utility tax starting in 2026 with 3% growth in the out years, starting at $11 million, 6% tax on all utilities. And you can see it does move the needle, but even a utility tax is not enough for true sustainability. And with that, I just dropped a lot of information on you, and I'm happy to answer questions that you may have. And again, remember, you're going to see this multiple times between now and November when you have to make a final decision. And I think we've already started to see the small meeting groups scheduled. So anyway, happy to answer questions.
Deputy Mayor Howe.
Thank you for this thorough presentation. Would you mind going back to the EFR numbers, please? Because I just want to try to set in my head. You were projecting certain rises over time, and what were the numbers what was the percentage of rise year over year?
Yeah, so for the next biennium, it's a 23% increase for 2025 and an 8% increase in 2026.
That's what's been requested.
That's what's been requested. Until we have other direction, that's what's been baked into the budget. Looking forward to 27 through 2030, we've put a placeholder of a 5% inflator, which is probably too low.
It's probably too low.
So Deputy Mayor Howe, if I may, I think what you're getting at is before we received the EFR proposed budget,
Right.
we were planning on 5% until we received the proposed budget, and then we implemented the proposed budget.
But you
because
did put that in?
Yeah, that is
Okay.
that is part of the increase in the budget.
Yes.
Okay. That's what I was trying to make sure I understood. And the other question I had has to do with the reserve, because it was before it was based on expenses and not revenue, and you're proposing to switch that, am I right?
Correct, yes.
And I remember voting on that. Seemed like a good idea at the time. What's different?
So the reason I'm recommending revenues is because there's another piece of the policy that I'm also recommending is that ongoing revenues need to pay for ongoing expenditures. And therefore, if your revenues start to not grow or change, you need to be proactive and change your expenditures at the same rate that the revenues are changing, or change your revenue structure. So it's based on what is controlling your expenditure budget, which is your revenues.
Can you help me understand also when this needs to be finalized again? Just remind me.
So we're targeting mid-November for adoption, but legally it has to be adopted by the end of the year. Otherwise, we
Right.
don't have legal spending authority.
Right. Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Councilmember Lamb?
Will we be getting a line item for the EFR request? Like, so we can understand what what's making up that 25%?
Yeah, Councilmember Lamb, I think that is for those members on the EFR board that represent the city to have that conversation with the EFR board itself.
I can add some color to that, in that we were given a proposed budget, and we responded by asking for more information. So at this point, where the board stands, the EFR board stands, is could we please get more information on how we could look at this budget, and to your point, look at getting the detail, because we didn't get detail. So we feel like we're very much in the early stages of this.
Okay, thanks. My other question was, last summer, the Fiscal Sustainability Task Force, they did a lot of work, and I was just looking and comparing the slides from then to now, and they're similar in that the expectation was that we would have zero fund balance by 2029, but I do recall that the utility tax, if it were to be implemented, would be pushed out. And now there seems to be more of an urgency. So I don't know what changed between last year and this year. Is it just that costs have grown quicker than we expected? So
Yes. Yes, costs have grown faster than what was in that original model. We did not expect a 23% increase for fire, as an example. And also with CPI and the way our contract language calls for personnel, it is the average of 4 years. And so remember, last couple of years, it was 9%, 6%. That is higher than the 5% growth that was projected earlier. So yes, it's mainly costs are rising higher than what was originally projected.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, I really appreciate this. Again, Vicki, and I do want to say I definitely support Deputy Mayor Howe and Councilmember Stewart to try and get more details for that EFR budget. Obviously, it's necessary, but would love to see that jump. So definitely support that. It looks like some head nods too. So does anyone else have any questions for Vicki? I can't wait till you have solutions.
Because it's like on you.
Yeah, you personally, yeah.
Well, I actually like the recommendations that came out of the Fiscal Sustainability Task Force. I think the utility tax is the right direction to go. I mean, what I'm looking at, all the different revenue options that are available, and I know you did request to have revenue options come forward. We'll be working to get that to you. But the other revenue options do not generate what a utility tax would be. So I think utility tax is absolutely the first step.
Great. Councilmember Trine?
Yeah, thanks. On the property tax of 1%, since it's such a high percentage of our budget, Can you look at that too as a possible, like what happens if it's 2%? Or if we go to the voters and say we need 3%? And then I guess the other question is that a one-time, is that only, we get to do that only one time, or could we do that continuous over a 2-year period of time for our budget? That I'm not aware of, but.
I can bring back some information on what a voter-approved levy lid lift would look like.
Because I'm just looking at it, it's like, yeah, you kind of dump and drop and then kind of balances out, and then we're not going to keep up.
Right, and the key with a levy lid lift is it is voter approved. We are raising the maximum we can with a 1% plus new construction, so it would have to be carefully crafted as to what the levy lid lift revenue would be used for. And again, voters have to say yes for it, but I can do some modeling on what different options would look like.
I would like to see that. Thanks.
And I will say too, any voter approved measure is going to take a couple years to get in place.
Correct.
That's not a fast one.
Great, thank you. All right, council, any other questions for Vicki? Awesome, we'll see you soon. Did you have a last slide? Sorry, I think we skipped over your.
You know what? I think I did. I think my last slide, and I just lost the actual presentation, was just the timeline. So here's what we've done so far. Today's the 17th, so next month will be the full CIP and budget document presented to council on October 1st. You'll get the department presentations October 8th and October 15th. And again, we're scheduling small group meetings with you. A couple of them already been scheduled, so more to come on that. I am always available to answer any of your questions, so don't hesitate to call me, email me. We want to make sure you fully understand this and have your questions answered before you have to take a vote. And again, we're targeting November 19th for budget adoption, but legally we have to have it adopted by the end of the year.
Mayor, if I might add,
Yeah.
if I might add to that, we are also continuing to update the question and answer spreadsheet as questions come in. So we'll continue to post that out when we get to each of these meetings as part of the packet with all the updated. So anyone can go and look and see any of the questions that came up. We will add those to the Q&A matrix for everyone's viewing.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Vicki. So David is the consultant on. Oh, that is the consultant. Okay, sorry. Because I know we have the snow and ice removal if Audrey is on there somewhere. She'll be able to, or is that coming back? I can't remember. Next.
Yeah, Mayor, I might suggest that we bring that one back for and let the team actually put together a presentation on the snow and ice for council options.
Okay, so I don't need to say anything other than it's coming back one day.
I think if you all concur that we pull that completely from the agenda, and we'll bring it back on the October 1st meeting.
Great, thank you. Okay, David, it's been a while.
Good evening, Mayor Clark, Council, David Pyle, Department of Community Development. With me this evening, I have Avril Beatty, our current Planning and Permit Center Manager, who oversees all of the permit activity and a lot of the development that goes on in the city. I also have Nell Lund from the Watershed Facet, who's been rebranded as Facet, FKA Watershed Company, and she is the lead consultant on the critical areas update. And this evening I also have Jackie Belisle, who's in the cloud, who's our management analyst supporting this effort, keeping it moving forward and filling in all the gaps. We're here to talk this evening with you about our critical areas update, provide a presentation on the status of that, the work that's been done, offer opportunity to ask questions in anticipation of opening a public hearing next month. So with that, I'll turn it over to Nell and Avril, who will go through a presentation and look forward to hearing more about this. Thank you.
Good evening, City Council. Avril Beatty, current Planning Permit Center Manager here at the City of Sammamish. We are here to discuss Critical Area Ordinance Update. This evening is a working session. We are trying, after working on this for the past year, we're hoping to bring you a relatively ironed out strike draft of our Critical Area Ordinance Update. We want to answer all the questions so that the rest of the steps moving forward will go as smoothly as possible. So that's our goal for the evening. So this evening, as we go through these, we are going to be opening the public hearing for this item or for these updates on October 15th, and we're hoping to close that public hearing on November 5th. And this is with the goal of having hopefully a lovely ordinance adopted by the council that would be effective on January 1st. And so here is the project timeline that we've had for the past year. We came to you a year ago with our kickoff, explaining the background of it's been a long time since we had updated these regulations, and how we're going to be working over the next year plus with the Planning Commission, with feedback from the City Council, with feedback from stakeholders and other agencies and the local tribes, and with residents to put together amendments based on best available sciences, and we end up here this evening. So in tonight's packet, we have a clean, it's not 100% clean, we're getting there, clean version of our proposed ordinance. We have the strike draft, the red line version. We also have a code modification matrix. This is really helpful for staff as well as the rest of you to see where things end up and why we did what we did. A lot of times after something's adopted, we wonder what happened to X piece of regulation, and then we can go back and cross-reference. It's very handy. We also have the Planning Commission letter of recommendation included, along with those meeting dates that we had mentioned previously. So I'm going to hand it off to Nell, and she's going to be covering the summary of updates.
Yeah, thanks, Avril. So this is a summary of the updates that were made in response to feedback that we received from the Planning Commission, and they're incorporated in the red lines, the code versions that you received in your packet. Under select vegetation removal code, we made an adjustment for hazard trees. Previously, just the tree replacement code was referenced, but now there are also options to do other forms of on-site restoration, as long as it can be documented and demonstrated with the critical areas report and/or vegetation management plan. That maintains functions and values. And lastly, if that's not feasible, then off-site restoration can be proposed under that updated code section at a protected site. And then for geologic hazard areas, we updated the critical areas report content to include cumulative impacts. And actually, a slight adjustment to this bullet, we kind of reorganized the critical areas report criteria so it's all in one place. And the cumulative impacts requirement is now under the general critical areas report criteria, because in discussion we decided that it made sense to apply that to all critical areas. And then there's additional report requirements for each critical area type that are spelled out in that code section now. Riparian areas, I think we discussed at the previous check-in how that language was incorporated to reflect language that the Department of Fish and Wildlife is using in their current guidance and best available science document. So that was reviewed and updated as it made sense for the language, while still making it clear that, that buffers are still measured from the ordinary high water mark as they were previously. Wetland and stream buffers. So BAS consistency for target buffer condition. What was done here was an update to both the wetland and the stream buffer sections to make it clear exactly what the criteria is for a well-vegetated buffer that under the standard buffer width requirements. And this, for streams in particular, this was done in response to discussions that city planning had with Snoqualmie Tribe.
And it's a method to ensure that, where buffers may not be increased on a site, they may still be required to be enhanced and improved. So we're maximizing the functions of the buffers within the city, or that's the intent here. Yeah, and it gives clear criteria of, 80% native cover, less than 10% invasive cover, so that can be enforced fairly smoothly. And then injection wells have been a question. There's, a lot of concern, of course, about protecting aquifers within the city. So that code was reviewed and strengthened. A hydrogeologic report is required. There's also additional administrative decisions that can be made to increase the level of analysis. And then there was consultation with the water purveyors as well to review and strengthen that code. And then based on our last Planning Commission meeting, the recommendations that we concluded with were to clean up the CAO, fix formatting, Scrivener's errors, typos. I think we got most of those. Unfortunately, in prepping for this meeting, I found some Scrivener's errors that were missed, so we will be getting that in order so that it's ready to go. And then, as I mentioned, there was a consultation with the water purveyors regarding injection wells safety and regarding hazard materials and well water protection. Some language was added under water quality regulations to not allow PFAS introduction into the waters. Back to you.
In addition to the motion by the Planning Commission regarding the ordinance itself, they also had additional considerations that they were suggesting. These aren't recommended for support by staff or the city manager's office, in that these are not amendment changes to the text itself, and these are things that are sort of broader policy issues. But these included the creation of a habitat map that meets best mapping practices. We've talked about mapping before. We would love to have everything mapped. However, time and money is always going to be a question. So maybe as part of a future work plan, it's a consideration, but we weren't looking to have that as something right now. That would be part of a broader mapping effort that would need to be work planned. Additionally, they discussed the cost-benefit analysis of having an arborist on staff and for funding for a position as part of the next budget cycle. Staff is not recommending that that be pursued at this time.
If I could add on to the first one, just to be clear, the updates that we made that we're recommending and that the Planning Commission's recommending as part of the critical areas update package, the code changes, do not necessitate updating maps or creating a habitat map. The way the code functions is it functions on its own. It's not dependent on using a map in order for us to administer the regulations. So the creation of a map is an enhancement that would be great if we had quite a bit of funding to create. The second item, we do not have anything in the critical areas rules that we changed that would necessitate hiring an arborist with the city. We do currently utilize an on-call arborist contract that we use for things like hazard trees or other tree recommendations. So none of the changes that are in front of you as part of the critical areas ordinance update necessitate hiring an arborist in order to administer. So I want to make sure we're clear on that both of these items that came as recommendations from the Planning Commission, I understand their perspective and where they stand on it. However, when they talked through it, they came to the conclusion that because neither of these items were necessary for the purpose of making a recommendation, they included them as other considerations or suggestions, but to be clear, they're not required for us to administer the rules as proposed.
With the discussions that have keep on occurring, working with the consultants and with stakeholders, we were trying to iron out how to deal with the question of who is a qualified consultant when it comes to geohazard areas. I get this terminology, it's a little muddled. Geotechnical engineer is not a real thing. It sounds good, sounds very technical, but that's not an actual title that exists within the American Society of Civil Engineers. So we spoke with the consultants and we were trying to figure out, to balance out, how do we get the information that we need in order to review a critical area report, whether it be for whatever type of geological hazard area, if it's a landslide, if it's erosion hazard, is it something that needs to be reviewed for during the wet seasons when there's additional erosion controls that may be required. So having these discussions, we agreed that having a civil engineer who has a geotechnical certification would be adequate when there are erosion hazards at an area, and they can provide a report. These are surface disruptions that could occur along the site. How do you keep soil and erosion from occurring and polluting the streams and other aquatic resources? Whereas if you have a landslide hazard area where you could have catastrophic failure of the earth, that's where we've proposed as part of that specific section for critical area report requirements that report be prepared jointly with a civil engineer and a geologist. That way we can have a geologist who understands the actual earth and rock and all of it itself, would work with an engineer to come up with a design based on the physical characteristics of that site to design something safely. So that was a change that we have sort of ironed out since the Planning Commission. So that's also included in the packet.
The draft language that we'll be proposing in the next packet. So there is some language in the packet. However, we have reevaluated that and have been working with our consultant team. And there have been some feedback that's been brought to our attention regarding the different types of licenses in the state and the different types of credentials. We're trying to be extra cautious, given that we're not celebrating. I guess we're remembering OSO today, or right about today. I think I can't remember what Mary said. But the point here is that we take development in areas where there are landslide hazards or steep slopes, which happen to be under the landslide hazard category and definition, very seriously. And if somebody is proposing any sort of a modification of a top or toe of slope buffer, or the slope itself, or a landslide hazard itself, we would want a report to be authored by not a civil engineer or a geologist, but both a civil engineer and a geologist working together to ensure maximum awareness of slope origin and maximum awareness of the different options that you have to help engineer safely something that could be allowed in that location.
So as part of the next steps, as previously stated, after discussion tonight, we will continue to iron out whatever wrinkles need to be ironed out, and then we'll be coming back to you to start the public hearing on October 15th. So we have questions for you. Do you have any questions about our critical area ordinance update as has been presented in the packet? Are there places where you think there needs to be further clarification? And do you think that there's anything missing? We're all human. We could have missed something. So if you see where we have a gap or see where we just need to further explain or something that seems like it needs better plain English included, please let us know.
Deputy Mayor Howe?
Well, I'll kick off some of the questions that I had. Thank you for the information here. I'm going to go back to the credentialing part for a second. And I was just trying to understand, first of all, do we have any of those individuals on staff? A geologist or a?
We do not.
We do not. So we're always going out.
We have civil engineers
Civil
on staff.
engineers. Okay, so when we go and get this report, who holds the risk? If the report is flawed, where's the risk? Well, they
Right,
stamp
so-
it, but am I suing them?
The design of a project is by the engineer who stamps the plans on behalf of the applicant.
Okay.
So we review it. That doesn't mean that someone wouldn't try to sue the city. There have been many cases of applicants suing cities or neighbors suing cities.
Right.
It happens in San Francisco pretty regularly.
Well,
Sorry,
it's
that's what
more,
saying.
I'm just
But yeah.
looking at it, often with consultants, the advantage is you have one throat to choke. And so, what? So, because you're looking for accountability, responsibility. And so, but I'm trying to understand, if we get a report that is flawed in some way, or that creates an error, or that creates a disaster, do they carry this kind of liability insurance that could cover a disaster?
I am not a licensed engineer, but I believe
I'd look to our city legal counsel regarding risk with that question, as, you know, they're licensed, et cetera. So I don't know if Carrie has anything to offer.
So, Deputy Mayor Howe, if I may clarify, typically the applicant's hiring the geotech.
Who is hiring who? Actually, I'm a little confused on that too.
Yeah, let's start there. So usually an applicant hires their own. Sometimes the city will hire one to conduct a peer review. At the end of the day, the applicant's relying on the geotech that they hired, and we're relying on the one that we hired. Both typically have professional liability insurance.
Okay, I can see some problems there, I guess.
so. The peer review of something happens with every city, with every project, whether it's a critical error report or it's structural calculations associated with flat, boring, no hazard site, where you still have a structural engineer who's designing the loads and whatever of the house, and they are stamping the plans. That doesn't mean that the city just takes it on face value. We still review the calculations.
Okay.
And we still issue a permit, but the applicant's engineer, they're the ones who have stamped and signed that plan set. Does that help?
Thank you. That actually helps me just understand the scenario much, much better. And I have a completely unrelated question to that, which has to do with habitat, and we're talking about maps and so forth. By any chance, are there any protected species in Sammamish? That we know of.
Yeah. I mean, there are priority species, but like threatened or endangered in species.
Yeah.
I mean, in our streams, we have some
Well,
Chinook.
we've got the fish, right? Okay.
Yeah. But off the top of my head, I'm not certain.
Okay.
We used to have bald eagles. We still have bald
We
eagles.
still do,
I want to be
actually.
clear. However, they have been delisted.
Right.
Good success story there. We do utilize the Washington State Department of Fish and Wildlife priority habitat species maps that we are not allowed to disclose. We have to sign a confidentiality agreement with the state when we get those maps, because you're not allowed to actually disclose those to the public.
Because of a poaching problem, or?
Well, they have the priority habitats and species are mapped online, but some are only mapped at the township scale, and you have to sign a disclosure and order that on a site-specific basis. So like the bat species, like big brown bat, little brown bat, those are mapped at the township. And that's so people won't go and, destroy their roofs.
habitat.
Yeah.
Okay,
So we
that's
do
disturbing.
we
but-
do have those maps in the background that we utilize. They are pretty good maps.
Okay.
However, at the end of the day, habitat, like other critical areas, is driven by the definition and by the features that those species use for their life cycle needs. So, think about a species and what it needs for food supply, for, I'm trying to remember the terminology, it's been a while, but there's different life cycle needs that a species have. And, whether it's reproduction or whether it's food supply or, migration there. So when we think about habitat, that's what we're focusing on. We're focusing on those features in our landscape that provide that life cycle need of that species. And if those features are removed or diminished, then that species has a harder time thriving in our environment.
Okay, that's really helpful. I have one last question, and it has to do with an interesting point that was brought up in public comment about having major decisions being under the purview of directors. Now, right now, that sounds good to me in that we have such fabulous staff. But are there protections in place? Are there protections in place, I guess, if there was an errant decision?
So I would say yes, because, well, first of all, it's someone's responsible. I want to also take a moment and say that I disagree with the comment that was made this evening that there are blatant violations of city code happening. I'm familiar with that individual's property. I'm familiar with the scenario that's going on there. There is a civil dispute between two property owners that has resulted in some unfortunate circumstances and an existing easement and an existing access that should have been abandoned that is being used, that happens to be in a buffer, yet that commenter's access is also in the buffer. So, I just want to point that out because I want to defend our staff and the work that they do, and I don't appreciate it being stated that there are violations of city code when there are not. So that said, I will say that we do take the work we do very seriously, and that permitting is challenging. I myself shy away from director discretion. I would rather it say 10 feet and we apply 10 feet, and if somebody doesn't like it, that's what the code says. Instead of the director can determine, because then you're always in a position where somebody doesn't like what you determined. So when possible, I would tend to migrate towards an actual prescribed definition or a standard or something. However, there are instances when it is so nuanced and it is a better outcome for us to retain some flexibility in how we apply rules in the city. And that's what we're working on here, is those instances. A majority of what you see in the code, if not almost all of it, 98%, it's, to throw out a number that's unfounded, is based on a numerical setting, a buffer, a percentage of something. It's all in there, but there are those limited instances in the code where that discretion is offered.
Very helpful, thank you.
Councilmember Lamb?
Since you're talking about prescribed standards, I have to go back and revisit the wetland buffers and the question that I brought up earlier in email. And when I was first looking at the chart, I was perplexed. It took me actually quite a bit of time to actually figure out what was going on, because my first instance was to just pick something I'm gonna build a short plat. I'm gonna put in a bunch of homes. And the way I was looking at the chart, it looked well, if I do a bunch of mitigation, I can build it 225 feet, away from the wetland. But that's actually not true. I can only build it 300. Because it is at category 1, I think it was habitat 8 or 9, the most stringent that you could get. But it wasn't clear if it was 300 feet or 225 feet. And then if I looked at putting in a unpaved trail the exact same standards would also apply. I'd have to be at 225 feet, but like it's so land, it's not very intensive, so it should actually be less. And so I was like pretty confused, and I actually looked at Issaquah's code, which was actually very clear. Like they talked about the different levels of intensity of land, that there's unpaved trail is considered super low intensity, and then a paved trail is moderate intensity, and then high intensity is like a big development. And so then you could apply that and actually have specific numbers to what the buffer should be. And so I wasn't clear at all, based on our charts, what the buffer would be for a trail, an unpaved trail.
So I appreciate you digging into that. It's a deep world of wetland buffers and how they're handled. And I will first of all have to say that every city does it a little bit differently. There isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. I'll also note that the City of Issaquah is at a different stage in adopting updated critical areas rules than Sammamish, and the documents referenced in their code are an older version than the documents that we're referencing in our update. That said, in understanding how our city's code is historically constructed, and we are proposing to keep it constructed, it's important to understand that the first out the door, you apply a prescriptive buffer to the site, regardless of the activity that's proposed. So we use a bit of a different approach than they do. Whereas they apply a buffer, it sounds like, and I have to dig into their code, so caveat of that is based more on the type of activity. We apply a generic buffer to all wetlands in the city, regardless of the activity that is being proposed. The second thing we do is we offer exceptions. We have 2 exceptions that are in our code. There's a reasonable use exception that is intended to provide relief when there is a taking of private property. There's a rule that encumbers the property, you can't use it. And we don't want to be responsible for taking a private property, sort of constitutional right, et cetera. We all know that whole thing. The other one is a public agency utility exception, and that exception is for public utilities, for example, putting sewer facilities in and things that have to go there, and they have to demonstrate that it must go there, and that allows it to go in. There's mitigation sequencing, avoidance, minimization, mitigation, on-site, off-site, all that good stuff, critical areas report. Then there's also public agencies, so like the Parks Department could need to put a trail somewhere in order to run it through. They have to show that. So those are the exceptions. And then we have what are called modifications or alterations. So that gets down into the specific critical areas. So if you had a wetland buffer, for example, we believe in our code, based on what our code is saying, that you can have a trail in a buffer. So instead of the Issaquah approach, which is in the case of a trail, you have to have a 50-foot buffer, we're saying you can put the trail in our 200-foot prescribed buffer, but it has to be located in this sort of in this general area of the buffer, and you have to do mitigation sequencing, avoidance, minimization, mitigation. So we allow by alteration or modification of the buffer, the trail to be placed there. So we're getting to the same place that they are, by way of a different path, no pun intended, by way of a different method. Thank you. So that's what we're saying here, is that it's just structured differently, and that ultimately our code, I feel, is more protective because it starts with a much bigger buffer. Then it allows certain things to happen in that buffer, whether it's a public agency utility exception or whether it's an alteration or modification that are prescriptively called out in the code.
Okay, so I don't know if there's anything, it just wasn't very clear to me, and I don't know if there's a way to make it more clear than that, what we have in the chart.
Chart itself, does the chart come from the actual state guidance?
They had it broken out into 2 separate tables, and we consolidated it into one. But yeah, it's from the 2022 Ecology's wetland guidance for critical area ordinance updates. It is, a more recent publication than the 2018 that Issaquah references in their current code. It does rely on some of the same underlying science. And the options that it lays out, the second and third option show land use intensity in a similar way, but with less detail. I think the option that the city has chosen, the option one that Ecology presents in their 2022 publication, emphasizes minimization measures and implementation of habitat corridors where applicable. And that aligns with, the current analysis of the best available science of trying to maintain robust, functional landscape connections between, these streams, wetlands, forest patches in our landscape.
It's inherently complicated. I don't, we'd love to simplify it. I think we've tried by reducing it down. I would suggest that it's possible for us to create maybe a lighter side public information handout that helps serve as a guide about how to read the code and use the code. Sometimes these codes are complicated and hard to read, and I'd love to streamline it, but we'll take another look at it. It's a great comment. There are definitely other sections in there that are complicated as well.
Okay, all right. Thanks.
Councilmember O'Farrell.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks, you guys, for your presentation tonight. And I spent a lot of August going through the Planning Commission meetings on this subject. It's a very weighty subject, lots of information to get through. Just a couple of quick things. In light of public comment that we received tonight and public comment that we've received all the way through the Planning Commission, I'm assuming you guys are gathering all of that information and working that into this document, and particularly information like that Mary brings to us about steep slopes and in light of everything with OSO. Is it possible, have you guys been able to sit with someone like Mary and receive her comments and talk through her ideas, or particularly areas that you might see that we could work things in better, we're maybe missing some things? I think it would be interesting to have some kind of a one-on-one and kind of glean some of that information in case we're missing anything in our document.
Over the past year, staff has met with Mary, and we love chatting with her at all of our planning commissions. Okay. We've also met with the Snoqualmie tribe one-on-one. We've met with the water and sewer districts one-on-one. We've gone through step by step with all of the comments from Sammamish Plateau. We've had many discussions with Ecology and Department of Fish and Wildlife. And am I forgetting anybody?
I would just add that I know a lot of Mary's concerns are around geologically hazardous areas, and we do have a sub-consultant on our team, HWA Geosciences, who also has a history of doing peer review in City of Sammamish, so they have a lot of familiarity with the code. They've been reviewing this update with us as well.
Okay, all right, thank you. And I know one thing that was talked about was steep slopes not being called out in the document, and I realized that maybe we're not able to map them because our maps are only like a kind of a suggestion. They're not something to be followed with, but are they called out in the document itself, like in the text?
They're defined under geologic hazard areas, and they are defined as steeper than 40%, more than a certain area and rise. They are mapped in our mapping tool as advisory, and we do require surveys. I can't recall if, as part of this update, if we redefined what is required in a survey. One of the challenges we've had in the past is that not all surveyors are created equally, and that some surveyors tend to move the staff gauge where you push the button in order to sort of flatten out slopes that maybe exist. So it really is a science in how you survey. So I tend to look for a grid, like a standard grid, and if you're surveying to a grid, you can't really hide the slope. But if your points are sort of scattered or clustered in certain parts of the site, then it's pretty clear that they're trying to hide the slope. So we're smart to that, and we do require identification of slopes, and staff are trained in how to use a clinometer and actually assess slopes in the field. So I feel like a lot of the stuff Mary's asking for, we hear loud and clear, and we largely already do. and we're in alignment on. There are some things where I feel like we're veering into property rights territory, and we're wanting to make sure as an agency that we're balancing what we can do versus with what would be an ideal scenario if you were trying to regulate one thing. But we're balancing things as we've talked about with our comp plan, and we have to keep that in mind.
Okay, thank you. And I noticed part of the packet for the Planning Commission, there was a gap analysis that was done on our previous document. So when you went through that, everything that was kind of highlighted in that gap analysis then has been worked into this new document. Is that correct?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. And then just the last thing, and it was the last recommendation that the Planning Commission had made about receiving a presentation from our water utility about injection wells. Because it seemed to come up quite a bit at the Planning Commission meeting about what is an injection well, and they don't really have a great reputation worldwide as having caused issues along the way. So is that something that we intend putting on the work plan for the Planning Commission next year to kind of receive such a presentation?
So we have satisfied all of the asks of the Water and Sewer District with this update. We've actually worked really closely. They've recognized that. They've been very appreciative of our interest in making sure we're protecting our groundwater here in the city. If the work plan going forward has a focus on something to do with regulating injection wells, we would definitely welcome that type of presentation or information. As of right now, we do not have anything on the work plan specifically related to injection wells, so I'm unsure of the context under which something like that would be hosted.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
Councilmember Trine?
Hey, can I follow up on that injection well subject that was brought up by my fellow council member, which I appreciate. What would be the consequence or the unintended consequence, or what do we know? What if this council were to decide to just deny straight up injection wells? Like, they are not allowed, period, in the city. If we were to take that kind of a bold stance, is there any legal consequences, or is there some risk involved, or for us to make that decision?
The injection wells are generally only proposed where you have a site that can't have regular infiltration of stormwater on site, and you don't want to run it, or you can't run it off the site. In my professional opinion, I don't think we need to prohibit them, because the regulations that we are proposing, as David Pyle was saying, were basically done in conjunction with the water and sewer districts. I think part of the challenge that the Planning Commission was having was not having an understanding of where the CARAs are located and how large they are and how much of the city is within different classes of critical aquifer recharge areas. As such, a lot of the city, if you want to have an injection well, there's going to have to be the report. It's going to be routed. It's not just going to be reviewed by the city. These get routed to Sandplat and Northeast Water and Sewer District. So we feel like we've worked really closely with these agencies in order, because they are very determined to make sure that things are safe. And part of the concern that they had prior to this update was that they refer to these CARA areas where if you drop water and it takes the water a certain amount of time to get down into the aquifer, that this is a three-dimensional world that we live in. And if you have water come down, you might have a CARA mapped and it looks vertical, but water doesn't always just travel up and down. And so you could have something that could trickle its way into the CARAs. So that's why they were having very, very strong language about the type of hydrogeologist prepare a report to make sure that those CARAs weren't going to be contaminated with these injection wells. So it's sort of a balance of, do you manage the stormwater on site? versus also making sure that you're protecting the cars. So we feel like with their input, and it's basically mostly their input, we feel like we found that balance with the regulations that we've proposed. I don't know if that actually answers your question, but that's how we kind of got here.
To answer your question, in addition to what she said, I don't disagree with anything, but to directly answer the question about the could we do that? We could do that. However, I would always urge that that be done in conjunction with the water and sewer district support as part of their water comprehensive planning process, identifying that there's a threat or a problem. They add that to their water comprehensive plan. In response, the city then takes action to help them implement their water comprehensive plan to protect our drinking water. However, the challenge being that would change development requirements for large portions of the city, increase costs, and would also likely result in what would be considered by the development community, just making sure to be clear about this, as an overly burdensome regulation and potentially disproportionate to the impact that's being caused. So there's a lot there to unpack, but if there was a proposal to go the next step, and if there was concern and there was documented potential impact to our groundwater quality, which is where we take a majority of our drinking water. The balance of that comes from the intertie that we have with Cascade Water Alliance, and that supplements the static or the well pumping that we do in the summers. The issue then would be is that we really would want the water and sewer district to take that on as the lead in identifying that there would be a threat to our groundwater.
Yeah, and the reason for my question was to kind of push staff for an answer similar to what I just heard, knowing that it probably wouldn't be on our work plan, that it would be on their work plan, and that we would come back and have regulations that would match what their comp plan is saying. So, and the reason for my asking it, as you all know, most people are aware, is it's because protect the water. That's the key, because that then protects life. And then we're elected to govern to protect the life of those, so policy that would do that. Okay, so second, since you brought up the development community is going to be mad, so they're mad at me. In here it talks about allowing a one-time up to 1,000 square foot increase in the existing total footprint of a building in the town center for a number of reasons, but it would actually allow them to put impervious surface into a buffer. At least that's the way it reads. So am I missing something there, or this is under, if you want to know, it's G4C so I just wondering because part of me is like, okay, if this is about fragmentation, then I'm like totally against it, because we already have fragmented our buffers and some of our wetlands and the corridors already. And we're, if you really had, if I could have my wish and make things go back in time, I would have put the wildlife corridors in first, and then we would have developed all around those. And then we'd have the passages. Well, it's been fragmented. The biggest fragmentation in the city is 228th. So call it what it is. That's a barrier. So how do we allow animals to get safely across that? So if you're going to then take the town center area and allow them to move within a buffer, 1,000 square feet, a one-time use, that seems a little, seems like one of those regulations where I just go, hey, make it 100 feet or make it 200 feet, because 1,000 feet could close off. If I have only a 200-foot buffer and you put a 20 by 40, whatever, 10 by 100, no, you'd have 100 by 100 square foot. Yeah, you could take half the buffer. If you make it narrow enough, you could take 200 feet of it. You could build right up to the river or wetland or into it. Actually, it says that you could go into it one time. I'm like, I'm not interested in doing that at all. So maybe I misunderstand what this is talking about.
Is this a red line strike draft, or is this existing code?
I think it's existing.
It's existing. It was before. I haven't seen you strike it out, and in the red line draft, it actually just moves it. You delete it, but then you're moving it to another location. It was hard to follow all your things, but.
Would you be able to find it in the matrix?
Yeah, here, you want to see my laptop? I'm looking right at it. Here's a.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I found it. Expansions of buildings in commercial zoning districts, structural modification of, addition to, or replacement of legally created buildings and associated impervious surfaces located in the community business, neighborhood business, office, and town center A zones that do not meet the applicable building setback or buffer requirement are allowed a one-time up to 1,000 square foot increase in the existing total footprint of the building and associated impervious surface areas lying within the buffer or building setback adjacent to the following. So it's only the town center A zone. So it's a landslide hazard area, aquatic and habitat resources.
But it's not just, I mean, it's not just the town center, David.
It's all the other commercial zones in the city. Yeah,
Right,
no,
and so it's
understood.
like, oh, wait a second, well, how many commercial zones do I have? If I go to a futures map and I add more towns or development zones or business zones, then it's increasing it another 1,000 one time for that development, and then another 1,000 over here. And the next thing you know, I've got 7,000 square foot building, impervious,
Right.
moving into.
It's 1,000 per parcel for the life of the parcel, right?
Yeah.
So if there's multiple parcels involved, if the council direction was to strike this section, I don't think we'd be opposed to it. What it does is it allows flexibility for those businesses or properties that may be looking to make a modest change to their footprint. Most of these buildings are way bigger than a normal residence, so having 1,000 square feet to work with is not a lot, even considering. There's also parking and circulation things. Sometimes if you're doing a tenant improvement, now you have to bring it up to ADA access requirements, and you need to increase the amount of, sadly, impervious surface and asphalt in order to provide ADA access where there wasn't previously provided. So what this does is it gives them a little bit of a relief valve to work under. It still does require compensatory mitigation, and it's still, like anything else in the critical areas rules, it does still require avoidance, minimization, and mitigation. So we would ask them to show us why they couldn't do it somewhere else. It's not just a dead giveaway.
I'm just curious, subject to the following, can we take a look at that?
Yeah, because I even look at like CWU,
Yeah.
we own that property in that wetlands there. If the college were to redevelop and then meet the standard, goodbye wetland.
So that limited increase is subject to specific conditions, one of which being that no portion of the modification, addition, or replacement is located closer to the critical area than the nearest extent of the existing buildings. There are some exceptions that are detailed, but that general code language I've seen in multiple jurisdictions, so it didn't raise flags for me. And as David mentioned, it's intended to allow some flexibility on existing developments that are encumbered.
What we'd likely end up with in its place would be some form of a variance, right? Which would then require public notice, and it's a bigger process, a little bit of a higher bar. Not saying it's a bad thing, just saying that, if it depends on who you are, and what you're trying to achieve. If you're the property owner trying to allow a tenant to move in and fill your space, you have to use then you're going to want this tool available to you. But if you're like a neighbor and you're concerned about slow, what I call nibbling of habitat or edges of things, well then I understand what Councilmember Treen's talking about. If there was a big commercial real estate boom in the city, and we had a lot of businesses moving in and a lot of tenant improvements happening and a lot of changes. Well, you could see this applied across multiple properties potentially in a year, in a worst case scenario. So, 7,000 square feet of impact, there would be compensatory mitigation that would go along with it. But nonetheless, I'm going to be honest and factual that, yeah, there's a buffer impact there.
Thank you. And the only other thing I think, the idea of returning to a city that was perceived in my goings around to other public elected officials that we were kind of a variance are us kind of city, it would be, before your time, David, it would be nice if we would limit that to some level too. Thank you.
Would perhaps adding language of 1,000 square feet or 10%, whichever is less, in case it's a small site?
That suggestion actually, I think, mirrors like King County Code. So.
Yeah, write that down.
I like that suggestion.
Nice.
Nothing more, Mayor.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah. Councilmember Lamb, or did anyone else have anything before? Okay, go ahead.
I just had a quick question about the habitats of local importance. Have there been any incidences in the past where somebody wanted to do something with their land and they weren't able to because of these habitats? And how would it affect, like, let's say there was something, and what would happen?
Carrie says yes.
The city attorney is nodding her head.
Yes, so it's been many years ago now, but there was a proposal originally to develop the critical area that is along 228th, just south of where the Starbucks is off Wolfpack Way. Years ago, that was originally slated to be a Pagliacci pizza site, which we now know is located in Saffron Center, right? And there was a challenge before the city hearing examiner where the city took the position that that needed to remain protected critical areas because the corner where there is the Starbucks and the fast food restaurants and the dentist orthodontics office building and the bank, all that, was allowed to develop to the extent it did and how you see it today in exchange for that area remaining critical area protected. And so they came years later trying to develop that, and the city said no, and the examiner agreed.
Was there a specific, like, animal or species, or was it just a critical?
No, it wasn't about that. It was just about the fact that there was a stream there, and it was considered now a protected easement and critical area. And so, again, this is just one example that I'm aware of because I was working with the city at the time and handled that case. But I'm sure there are many other examples where this has come up and development has been blocked.
I was interested in, like, specific, like, species and what would happen. Has there been anything like an animal or a bird?
Yeah, I can't think of an example of my direct work or peer review work in City of Sammamish where a species has blocked development, but it can modify the development. Most commonly, pileated woodpecker leads to comments to, retain more woody debris on site, create snags. Sometimes a wildlife corridor is required given the configuration of streams and wetlands on a property and the definitions that are presently in the code. And that can lead to changes in site layout, potentially number of lots.
I think another one that is, I think you're all familiar with, is fish passage.
Right.
And when designing stormwater systems, we need to rethink how those are designed because it's a species that we have to think about in terms of habitat. There are also the rules that we had that we're retaining the same component of, but I think it was more focused on this in the past, the current rules that are in place today. are more related to, is more focused on relationships as opposed to individual specific features. And the relationship that it's really focusing on is that riparian sensitivity, where there's a relationship between aquatic features and the upland, and that is an essential life cycle connection for species. And what it's trying to look for is where there are wetlands and streams, and they're nearby each other, and there's floodplains, and there's all these dynamic things, not real FEMA floodplains, but floodplain relationships. So that focuses on things like, I think the easy one that I think we've talked about with the Planning Commission is amphibians, and the issue that amphibians need lots of pockets amongst a bigger matrix because they need to have places to migrate to. There's been a lot of research done, at least back when I was studying this 15 years ago, related to amphibian die-off and the lack of diversity in amphibians because they're constrained in their habitat patch and they don't have the ability to migrate, and their diversity is dependent on others being able to interact across the landscape. So it's those landscape connections, it's patches, and it's a little bit of an obscure language that we talk about this. There was a really well done report done when I was in Bellevue that was done by Watershed. That was a white paper on suburban and exurban habitat. That if you're interested in understanding more about these relationships, I could send it to you. It's pretty dense, but at the end of the day, their finding is that there are two things you need to protect: is the connections and the features. So we're focusing on that in our code and following with that research, and hopefully at the end of the day we can be more successful. But I would say that even in all the years I've been doing this, I've never seen a project be fully stopped because of habitat. It's always led to somewhat of a redesign, somewhat of a mitigation through retention of features. Want to cut a tree down? Well, you need to snag it. You need to create cavities in it to allow for nesting or for pileated habitat, those kind of things.
Okay, thank you. Great.
Great. I'm not seeing any other hands. I really like the recommendations, specifically the geologist. I was at OSO for 3 weeks responding, and I don't know if you have any lessons learned from, I worked at DNR at the time, so I don't know if there's any good lessons learned from, all the forest practices stuff that they do. That would be super helpful to, what they've kind of worked out. So I don't know, but that's, really good recommendation.
Yeah, I think our best available science review cites a discussion panel following OSO and some of their recommendations.
Perfect, yeah. Or just call Casey, the state geologist. That's also helpful. These look, I don't see anything else missing. I don't see any other hands as of this moment. And it seems like just the one addition that Councilmember Treen had. Cool. You have some next steps?
Maybe.
Yeah.
Oh.
No.
Looks like we don't have, no, because there's no motion for you to make tonight.
Yeah,
We just need all the suggestions and feedback.
Awesome.
So thank you for all of this discussion. We will be working this back into our red lines. We'll be adding the up to 10%, whichever is less, regarding that section in G.4.c. And if there's any other information that you feel like you would need to help you make a fully informed decision. David, anything else you want to add?
Well, I wanted to just add that, I've heard some comments tonight about readability and usability, probably for our public, and being able to apply it, in someone to open it and understand it. One of the things we do have with the contract with Facet is the creation of public information handouts and tip sheets and FAQs and those kind of things, user guides, if you will. So we're going to definitely be going through this and working with the consultant. We've got them still till the end of the year. to try and get, to get our best foot forward in starting off the implementation of these rules going forward. And that's going to include a whole set of, practical guide sheets and tips and things like that. So, if you see anything else when you're reading through this and you're like, hey, this is kind of confusing, please let us know. It's good to have other eyes on it. Sometimes we stare at this all day and we become kind of benign to how complicated it can be. So let us know and we'll make sure to create tip sheets to help address that. So thank you.
And if I could just add, I know one of the questions asked for some exhibits kind of illustrating the different buffer options. And unfortunately, I didn't find that in the guidance and we didn't have that ready, but Facet recognizes the sort of power of communication through exhibits, and we have graphic designers on staff that help us put those together as part of that toolkit to get public information sheets together.
All right. I think you're free. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
We'll see you shortly.
Awesome. Okay, Scott.
Thank you, Mayor. Very briefly, I want to follow up on the budget presentation tonight by saying that we will continue to take public comment throughout the process, encourage folks to get to submit public comment to council and or myself. We're happy to include that and as we go through the process, and want to make sure that as part of our continued outreach on all things budget, that folks know that they can submit their questions and concerns. Separately, I want to remind that this week is Welcoming Week, and tomorrow night is Welcoming Week at the Farmers Market. And we will have a booth out there. There are special performances, international food vendors, and multicultural and civic booths. Thank you. So please join us. There's only 2 more market days to go. So this is the final notice that tomorrow night and next week are the last ones of the season. I want to thank the Chamber for putting on a phenomenal farmers market this year. It's really been fantastic to see all the different vendors that they have and all the folks coming out. So thank the community as well for supporting the market and the vendors at the market. And I'm looking forward to next year's version, and hopefully it'll be bigger and better as we continue to grow. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Mayor. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Council, do you have any reports? Deputy Mayor Howe?
Just that Pam will be meeting with the Eastside Fire and Rescue FAC board, which is the finance portion of the business, and is going to be able to hopefully get some more information for us as we try to flesh out our plans as we look at the budget.
Councilmember O'Farrell?
Just really quickly, just want to let council know I attended Farmers Market last Wednesday to the Sammamish Children's Business Fair. It was incredible. There were 10 booths there. It was the brainchild of my neighbor, actually, who's 9 years old, who put this event together in conjunction with the Chamber of Commerce. They also had, and her name escapes me, but she's like a business coach, and she was there on hand to kind of talk to the kids. They all got a free copy of her book as one of the little prizes for being there. And there's like worksheets and kind of help to, what do you do to start your own business? And it was really inspiring to see the energy and the enthusiasm of all these kids. And so and they were all from the Sammamish area. So it was just really wonderful to kind of talk to everyone and buy a little bit from each booth. So it was really fun. Yeah.
Councilmember Lamb?
I have a Board of Health meeting on Wednesday and a Solid Waste Committee meeting on Friday. I sent out the agendas for those. And just a reminder that SCA, the regional board and committee applications are due on October 17th. And at our last big meeting, they wanted to tell us all again that even if you are currently serving on a board, you still have to submit an application.
Councilmember Treen?
Yeah, tomorrow I'll be at the GMPC meeting. That'll be on the growth target reconciliation process. And so that'll be on the agenda, and it's the only item on the agenda.
Awesome. That's plenty, I'm sure. Yeah. Okay, if nothing else, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All right, moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Great. Good night, everybody.